So if you can finish up kind of what you're doing, we'll get started. Again, the trip that I took was called Native Lands of the Southwest, the Doctrine of Discovery and its Legacy. And if folks are working in the kitchen, maybe we can close the door and the window. Thank you.
We'll try and be quiet.
Thank you.
Like a church mouse.
All right, thanks so much for staying, everyone. I do not anticipate that this will be very long. So it's only 14 slides. So change the slide. Okay. So this is you might think an odd picture to begin with, but this is a statue called Vision of Peace. And my interest in Native Americans really all started when I was a little girl. My dad used to take us downtown St. Paul to the Ramsey County Courthouse. And this statue is in the lobby of the Ramsey County Courthouse. It is, it's solid marble. It weighs, onyx. It weighs 60 tons and is 36 feet tall. It was unveiled in May 28, 1936, called the Indian God of Peace, and it was dedicated to war veterans of Ramsey County, a tribute to enduring peace. At the base of the statue are 5 Native Americans smoking peace pipes. And the statue was renamed Vision of Peace in 1994. The statue oscillates one 360-degree turn every 2.5 hours. And so just about every time we went downtown with my dad, he would take us in to see the statue because I was always excited about it. And I would stand there and want to see, I would want to watch it turn. But he was not patient enough to let me do that. So. But then, you know, throughout my school years, I didn't know it then, but I know now that I really didn't learn very much about Native Americans except during Thanksgiving. Right? So it's just been in the last couple of years, in fact, that I learned about the Doctrine of Discovery. I had never heard of this before, but with the group that I meet with, we have a little discussion group that meets on Monday mornings, and we saw a video that talked about the Doctrine of Discovery. And I think most of us that day were really astounded to hear about this because none of us knew anything about it. It's really a missing piece of our history as well as Native American history. So I mentioned in the sermon, it was in 1452 in Europe that Pope Nicholas V set forth the first in a series of 15th century papal edicts or papal bulls. And it declared war against all non-Christians, promoting conquest, colonization, and exploitation. So inhabitants of discovered lands were to be converted, enslaved, or killed. Then in 1823 in the United States, the doctrine was basically adopted into law by the Supreme Court in a case Johnson versus McIntosh. It gave European Christian nations ultimate dominion over the land and the native peoples. And it provided really for the rest of Manifest Destiny and all of the westward expansion that took place in our country. So it was just a few months later then that I heard about, or I received a flyer in the mail about the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program trip to the Southwest to learn about the doctrine of discovery and its legacy in native lands. And you know how those things happen? Once you hear something new, you hear it again, and then you hear it again. And so it was not a coincidence, it was a God incidence. I think that I had only just learned about this, and then there was this opportunity. So I signed up to go. This is our group. There are a few others included in the group, some of the people who were members of this church. The church is Trinity Church in Chinle, Arizona. We had 35 participants from 15 different states, from ages ranged from early 20s to, I think the oldest person we had with us was 90 years old. So the purpose of the trip then was, we were told right off the bat, this is not a sightseeing adventure. Though we would certainly see many sights, the real purpose was to go and learn and listen and hear the stories of the people. We also had homework to do before we left on the trip. We were asked to read at least one book of 4 books that were recommended, and then we were given a long list of videos and readings. Many of those videos I then watched with my Monday morning discussion group, since they were all interested to learn about this as well. Sorry, shall we go back for a second, please? Okay, so the purpose of the seminar was to give us an opportunity to appreciate the rich history, cultures, and resilience of indigenous peoples in the Southwest, to learn about the impact the doctrine of discovery has had on indigenous peoples in the past and continues to have today, and to explore peacemaking issues such as land and water rights, intergenerational trauma, poverty and addiction, border town conflicts, environmental racism, the health effects of uranium mining, and the impact of boarding schools. There was a lot of beauty to behold on the reservation. I somehow always thought that reservations were much smaller than they really are. To me, I always thought of it as sort of like a neighborhood or a small village. The reservations are tens of thousands of acres. Tens of thousands of acres, but it's a lot of land like this. It's beautiful, but it's not usable. You can't farm this land. You can't build much on this land. And so, but it certainly was beautiful. And we saw beauty in the churches that we visited. There are approximately 95 Native American Presbyterian churches in this country. 95. In the whole country. Yes, the whole country. The Laguna Church we worshiped in on Sunday morning. We shared a meal with them, and then we heard a speaker that talked about land rights, and we toured the area where there has been a lot of, well, there was about 30 years where uranium mining took place. And many of the houses in that area have been abandoned because the water is toxic, the land is toxic, and those homes are unlivable. So that sort of thing mars not only the landscape, because you can see where the mining has taken place. It mars the landscape, but it also makes it unlivable. At Trinity Presbyterian Church, the woman in the picture on the bottom was one of our leaders. She is also a lay pastor serving at that church in Chinle, Arizona. And at the Loop Presbyterian Church, the interesting thing about that church was that that congregation has done mission trips to Poland, Jamaica, and Scotland. A little ironic, but they're certainly proud of that. Yeah, to Scotland.
What are they doing in Scotland?
I don't know.
Visiting the Ione Church or something where he started?
There were a couple of other churches that we visited, but one of them, as I said in the sermon, we didn't get there till dark, so didn't get any pictures of that one, and I don't remember what happened with the other one, but so we learned about there was very much beauty in people and the culture. This little 3-year-old girl, I think it was her uncle who was doing some explaining about the ceremonial dance that was taking place. And he said, I think this was his niece, he said she had just started learning how to dance on Tuesday, and this was Saturday. And she insisted on taking part in the dance on Saturday. I want to read to you Why We Dance. This was a mural that was in the hotel where we stayed. It says, why we dance. Pueblo communities honor nature, the seasons, the harvest, and animals through dance and song. The drum beat is our connection to the earth, and as a community, we come together with purpose. In addition to the beauty of that 3-year-old, at another ceremonial dance that we witnessed, there were grandmothers on the sidelines watching probably their grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren who were the ones dancing. But the grandmothers were sitting in their seats doing the moves, still doing the dances that they had probably taught to their children and grandchildren. It was beautiful. As you know already, simply from the artifacts that we displayed in worship today, there is a lot of beauty in their artwork. Most of the art that we saw was in the Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque and at the Heard Museum in Phoenix. There are some things that I want to point out. With the birds, you would see a lot of use of birds and feathers. And for the Pueblo, they symbolize thanks, respect, and honor. And so you'll see a lot of birds and feathers in their pottery and other artwork. And then all the way on the end, that is called a healing blanket. And there's a beautiful description of that, which I don't have in front of me. And it's on my phone, which is upstairs. It's always how that goes, right? Okay. A beautiful and very meaningful artwork, of course. There is beauty in sacrifice. This is one of the most powerful places that we visited. I only vaguely remembered learning about the Navajo code talkers from World War II. But this area was called Window Rock Tribal Park and Veterans Memorial. So the statue, of course, is of a code talker, and I'll read the plaque that is on the front of the statue. The legendary Navajo code talkers. During World War II, in the South Pacific Theater, the Japanese were extremely proficient at breaking into military radio communications and transmissions. Thus, they were able to decipher U.S. military codes. The U.S. Armed Forces needed to find a secure method of communication if they were to have any chance of defeating a clever and intelligent foe. To devise a secret military code using their native language. I skipped a sentence. To counter the cleverness of the Japanese cryptographers, 29 Navajo Marines were recruited to devise a secret military code using their native language. By war's end, there were over 400 Navajo Marines serving as code talkers, and the code vocabulary had doubled.
Hello?
So successful was this innovative code that the Marine Corps commanders credited it with saving the lives of countless American Marines and soldiers. It enabled their successful engagements throughout the Pacific Theater, which included the battles of Guadalcanal, Wake Island, Tarawa, Saipan, Guam, Midway, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The code paved the way to early victory for the Allied forces in the South Pacific. Major Howard M. Connor, 5th Marine Division signal officer stationed on Iwo Jima, commented on the gallantry of the Navajo code talkers. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would not have taken Iwo Jima. Far from their homes, these brave young Navajo Marines served our nation with honor and dignity. The tale of their exploits remained a closely guarded secret for decades in the event that the Navajo code talkers' unique talents would be needed again. In 1968, the Navajo code was finally declassified. In July 2001, at the National Capitol Rotunda, United States President, the Honorable George W. Bush, awarded the Congressional Gold Medals to the first 29 Navajo Code Talkers, their surviving spouses or children. In November of 2001, at the Navajo Nation capital of Window Rock, Arizona, the Congressional Silver Medals were awarded to the rest of the Navajo Code Talkers, their surviving spouses or children. Sadly, many of the Navajo Code Talkers have passed on, never knowing of the honor a grateful nation has bestowed upon them. The Navajo Code Talkers will never be forgotten. And just as an aside, the person who had the idea for a Navajo code was connected to the Loop Presbyterian Church, which was one of the churches that we had visited. There's a lot of ancient history. The land was not empty. The land was inhabited and successfully, amazingly engineered, as you can see in these ruins, thousands of years ago. These are homes. And this is only a portion of a home. Some of these homes that they built had 600 rooms. And there are whole national parks that have these ruins present. But of course there are past traumas and lingering pain. These were photos that I took of a couple of displays at the Heard Museum regarding Indian boarding schools. If you want to come up later, you can see more closely. In this picture over here, let me read for you. You can see the pictures before and after. There's a photo of the children when they arrived, and the photo right next to it is of the children after they were Americanized. But it says, when you first started attending school, they looked at you, guessed how old you were, set your birthday, and gave you an age. Then they'd assign you a Christian name. Mine turned out to be Fred. And I think that's actually this person here. And then the bottom one shows a gravestone with the name Ernest. And there's a quote from probably a letter that was sent to his parents. Your son died quietly without suffering like a man. We have dressed him in his good clothes, and tomorrow we will bury him the way the white people do. Signed, Richard H. Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian School. And if you think about it, if you grew up in a boarding school, this is a good example of how the legacy of these things continues. If you think about it, if you were raised in a boarding school, how do you know how to parent your own children? If you were abused in a boarding school, how are you going to parent your own children without abusing them? We share what we learn. Some children never return home. from being in the boarding schools. There was a story told by a pastor that we met. She's pastoring a Native American Presbyterian church. She is Native American in Phoenix, Arizona. She told the story of her grandfather who, when he was about 4 years old, he had younger siblings. And she was told the story of how this village, this Indian village, had been warned by someone who saw the people coming to take their children. And so they warned the village, hide your children, they're coming for them. So her grandfather's family, his parents, hid the younger children, but they thought they would not be believed if they didn't have any children. So they let the white people take the 4-year-old to boarding school. But because they knew ahead of time, the father of this child got a straw hat. And he gave it to his son and he said, take this with you and remember who you are. They came and took the child to boarding school and promptly took away his straw hat. And the pastor said that her grandfather, when he was getting closer to the time of his death, he was about 84 years old, and he had never spoken much about the boarding school. But he said to her at that time, I don't understand why they didn't let me keep my straw hat. Just heartbreaking stories. One good thing about the boarding school buildings that still stand, some of them are used now as schools to teach Indian culture to the children. So all of the beauty that is around really only masks the lingering trauma, and the issues are ongoing. There are people you can imagine have identity conflicts within themselves. Am I Indian? Am I white? Am I Christian? Am I traditional? There were some families even who said to their children, you are either traditional or you're Christian, but you cannot be both. But the people that we talked with do practice both of those things, and in fact, we were told that their own traditions, spiritual traditions, and Christianity can and do intersect. They share similar values and beliefs. In fact, one person who's an ordained minister said, powwows got me through seminary. Land conflicts, as I've already mentioned, the place where we toured, mining, oil extraction, wind farms that were put up by a private company on top of a mesa. So you can imagine how that scars the view of the people who live in that area, and not only does it scar the view, but it takes away the sacredness. It dishonors the sacredness of that land. The nuclear testing all mars the sacred landscape and poisons the ground. They still have conflicts over resources, including land rights. and water rights. In terms of health, there's a really high rate of diabetes because they no longer farm, they don't have good land to farm on, so they're not eating fruits and vegetables like they used to. Their diet is poor. There's a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse. MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. The violence against Native people, the rate of violence against Native people is 10 times higher than other ethnicities. 4 out of 5 women experience violence. And murder is the 3rd leading cause of death among women, Native American women. And then historical and intergenerational trauma, the guilt, shame, and anger are passed down to the next generation. Again, how could it not be? Not only if you have not learned how to parent your children, but if you're still living with these memories, these traumatic memories, and you're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, how do you not then expect your children and grandchildren to also become addicted? It doesn't go away just because the people who went through it are gone. It is passed down. In fact, trauma is said to show up in DNA in the generations that have followed people who've been through traumatic events. So what can we do? My discussion group on Mondays, we ask this on a regular basis as we study a number of different groups of people. Awareness and acknowledgement of the history, of their ongoing struggles, and just a recognition and remembering that we are all related. We can do advocacy and support. I've got some websites here. The ChinleyPlantingHope.org is the organization that is doing the bookmobile for children. They're also in the process of building a community center in the area. Tewa Women United is an organization that helps women with all sorts of issues. MMIWUSA.org and NativeWomen'sWilderness.org. As you heard in the sermon, we need to prioritize acts of love over acts of power and greed. And we were reminded, and I do want to say this because it's important, there is nothing unique about the United States that makes us any worse or better than any other country in the world. This happens everywhere because of power and greed. People naturally try to make sure that someone is beneath them. We all do that. So it's guilt that belongs to all of us, really. And we were also reminded, just because we can doesn't mean we should. There are a lot of things we can do. We can march all these people across to the other side of the Mississippi River because they're weaker than us, and we are stronger than them, and we can. Did anybody stop to say, should we? Did anybody stop to look at the scripture that said, owe no one anything except love? Going back to the Vision of Peace statue from my childhood, it occurred to me just this morning that to honor and understand the Native American people, past, present, and future, is a way that I can honor my own past and really really act out what that statue of peace was meant to remind us of. Thank you for listening. I'll take questions if you have questions.
Very good.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Yeah, Wanda.
I don't have a question, I have a comment.
Yes.
I support Running Strong for American Indian Youth, and they're just now putting water to individual homes. They were walking for miles, and the water was not deep that they got, and so they're piping it into the homes, and I'm very thankful for it.
And that's only a recent development,
Yeah.
that homes are getting water directly. Yeah. Yes.
I was curious what books they recommended you read.
I've got the list in my bag right here. It's not upstairs with my phone. Yes.
Why don't you post what is upstairs with your phone and the list of books in the e-news?
That is a good idea. I can do that.
Share that with New UMC.
And we can share it with New UMC. Yes.
I had to think, when you were talking about the number of Presbyterian churches, I bet there's even more Methodist churches out there. You know, there are more
Probably.
Methodists than there are Presbyterians.
Sure,
okay,
probably.
That are doing good things too. We are so thankful for our UMC cake friends.
And what many of those churches need is help repairing their buildings. Those buildings have been standing for a long time, and they are in great disrepair. And these congregations are small. We all know about that. They're small and they're poor, and they don't have the funds to even have an ordained minister, much less to repair their buildings.
And PCUSA is helping with that.
PCUSA does have a fund that our mission committee has sent some money to help Native churches with their buildings. Leslie.
This is just something that I learned about recently that I feel like sharing. There's an article in the most recent issue of the Smithsonian about this.
Yes.
But it has to do with Choctaw Indians who actually were part of the Trail of Tears. They ended up in Oklahoma. They were poor, they were starving, having a difficult time. But it was at the time of the Irish potato famine. And these Choctaws raised several $100s, which was a lot at that time, and sent it to the Irish folks. Right?
Wow.
And if that is not an act of love,
Yes. Yeah.
nothing is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you were able to participate in this study.
Thank you.
That's great.
And I'm grateful to my congregations who, because of continuing education funds and travel funds, were able to allow me to take this trip. I used up pretty much everything in both of those. Just on this one trip.